Chris, thank you. So Chris, thanks for that kind introduction. The question we posed for this small seminar is sales management the weak link in professional selling? And before I answer that, I just really want to frame the conversation because the answer can be a little bit confronting, but I think it's nevertheless true. And this is really the agenda for today. So we're going to talk about what really are the trends that are going on. And I know that everybody throws up endless slides about statistics in the marketplace, and I've certainly got some as well. But the real key is, what is it that we need to do about what's happening, especially in the area of commoditization. And one of the really important things to do is to really define words properly. The thing I find when I help organisations hire salespeople and also help them decide who they need to move on is that people use terms in professional selling just like cliches. You know, they use the term strategic, they'll say they qualify a deal, but when you really scratch below the surface, people have pretty poor definitions of the way that they operate. And we're going to define what being strategic really means today. We're going to define what moving to value really means today. All of these kinds of words here to really get a good understanding of it. But maybe just to tell you a little bit of a personal story, I survived a plane crash some years ago, and one of the reasons I survived that crash is my flying instructor gave me a definition of the word confidence that really worked for me. And I know every CEO that I've reported to wants confidence in the forecast and the pipeline. We all agree with that. And they often get frustrated that they don't feel that they have confidence in the pipeline and the forecast. And as sales managers, we feel that, you know, we get numbers and projections from salespeople, but often those forecast dates are based on their own, if they're men, their own testosterone-fueled need to hit a number at the end of the quarter, as opposed to what's really happening inside the customer's organisation. So we need to define things well. That was actually my aeroplane. So it was a mini Pitt Special aerobatic plane. And my flight instructor taught me how to fly, and one of the things I believe about selling is that the way we sell is just as important, often more important than what we sell. Salespeople want to have a great value proposition they're taking to market, but the way we sell is actually really important. And the way you fly a plane is really important. My flying instructor told me things like, you know, the only time that you have too much fuel on board is if you're on fire. Now, I know that sounds funny, but it's very true. It makes you think about the fact I should always have as much fuel on board as I possibly can, because you may need to stay in the air longer than you thought you needed to. He taught me things like all of the runway behind you is of no value at all. And another thing he taught me was that he said to me one day when I was about to go solo, he said, I want you to give me the definition of confidence. What is confidence? And we often ask salespeople, are you confident that you're going to win this deal? And I thought I had a good answer. My answer was, confidence is when knowledge and skill and experience all come together. And he said, no. He said, confidence is the feeling that most pilots that died had just before they understood the situation. So he instilled in me a definition of confidence of, it's the feeling you have just before you understand the situation. And I've taken that definition into selling. I'm always being positively paranoid. I don't mean to be negative, but thinking, what are my competitors plotting and doing? What could be going on inside the customer's organisation? What could possibly go wrong? Because when I was flying this aeroplane, I was at about 1,500 feet and I lost the drive system. So all of a sudden my tacho went off the rev counter, the engine revved its head off, the propeller was still spinning, and I pushed the nose down, I pulled the throttle back, propeller was still spinning, I tried to reapply power gently, and then the throttle just raced off again, and I figured, I've got an engine, but it's not connected to my propeller. And everything that I'd been taught by him saved my life. My father gave me a third definition. You know, he said the definition of a good landing is anyone that you walk away from. And I decided that that was going to be my definition for landing the aircraft, because I didn't have a road or an airstrip to land on. I needed to have the attitude of, I'm not going to try and save my airplane and not let it get scratched. I'm just going to make sure I keep it flying into the ground and I'll walk away. I might break a leg or something, but I'll live. So definitions are actually really, really important. The way we sell is just as important as what we sell. So let me just give you some stats. So what do you think the answer is here? So what percentage of people in business-to-business field sales won't have jobs in this industry in 10 years from now? I was actually in the USA speaking at a conference with Lou Schachter from BTS, who came up with a statistic. It's 2 years ago now. But what do you think that number is? The answer is 40%. So would someone say 80%? Yeah, it's 40%. And why is that? Why will 4 out of 10 people in business-to-business selling not have roles in professional selling anymore? The answer is they don't deliver enough of the right kind of value. Salespeople have always needed to deliver value, but the way that value is defined today is very different to what it was 20, 30 years ago. My first ever job in professional selling was doing radio paging. I was selling when mobile phones first came to market. They were $6,500 each, and there was no subsidised call plan. And I was selling radio paging, the ability to get a written message to somebody instantly in the suburbs of a city for a lead or an appointment being cancelled. There was a good business case for it. And when I started selling, I was really bad at it, but I ended up getting pretty good. But the value I was delivering back then was really as an information provider, because there really was no viable internet, and people needed information, and they talked to a bunch of different salespeople from different companies who'd give them all this different information. They'd build a relationship and rapport with somebody that they trusted, and then they'd buy based on the information. We all know today that the internet's driven this rapid commoditization of almost everything, and it's relentless. So they'll be gone if they don't figure out how to deliver the right kind of value. What percentage of business-to-business salespeople effectively differentiate in the mind of the buyer? Now, if we talk to every salesperson and say, when you did that sales call, did you successfully differentiate us? Did you make us compellingly different during that sales call? What would most people answer to that question? Yes, of course, I'm a professional. That's what you pay me to do. What do you think the real number is? What's the real answer here? It's terrifying. It's 14%. 86% of the time that a salesperson's calling on somebody, they're not doing this well. I did a keynote speech recently for a big multinational. In Australia, they turn over $1.2 billion. They've got a lot of salespeople. They're owned by a German company. It's not SAP. But they did the analysis, being Germans, about what does it cost every time one of our people jumps in a car and goes and physically visits somebody. The number was $437. Every time a person visits a prospect or a client, it's $437. And they're a smart organisation. They took that data and they used it to ask a question of sales management and salespeople. Are you generating $500 worth of value every time you go and visit a client? Are you generating $500? And I've got to say, having a coffee and being someone's friend is not delivering enough value. What about this number? What percentage of sales engagements meet customer expectations? It's a very similar disappointing number, only 15% of the time. The thing I find interesting when I've been running companies is if a salesperson loses a deal and you ask them why, they'll say, well, we lost the deal based on price. And if you say, well, why did we win the deal? They go, well, we won the deal because of me and my fantastic relationships that I built inside this account. And yet often the reverse is true. There's lots of analysts out there. There's the Aberdeen Group. The Corporate Executive Board have done some good research in challenger selling. Miller Hyman have started a research institute, which is a very good organisation. If you took the sum of all of the research in the last few years and said, what really are the key highlights? It's really these 3 things. The first thing is that buyers are increasingly developing shortlists and deciding who they'll go and invite to come in and engage with in a sale well in advance of us ever knowing about it. So they're doing their research online, they're increasingly using social media, but they're forming an opinion of us and our organisation before our salespeople have a chance to really go and shape it. The second thing is that buyers are engaging sellers much later in the sales cycle in line with that. If you have a look at the research, the corporate executive boards say that buyers are 57% of the way through their purchasing process before they bring a seller in. There's other research that says they're up to 70% of their way through their buying cycle before they bring a seller in. And obviously, the salesperson can still influence the customer if that's the case. But to me, one of the things that defines what strategic selling is getting there early, establishing relationships at a senior level, setting an agenda around unique business value that you can offer the client. You need to get there early and set an agenda. If you're turning up when they're 70% of the way through the process, it's fairly probable that someone else, one of your competitors, has been shaping that agenda. And the third thing is, one of the big trends, and it's universal, is that because of all of this, and the Challenger Sale book from the Corporate Executive Board has really been driving this, which has been great, is that sales organisations are increasingly expecting their salespeople to have stronger business acumen. They're expecting their salespeople to understand the customer's business, not just know about the product or service that they're trying to sell them. They've got to be able to go and have a business conversation with people, and they regard that very important. You know, the last 5 years has absolutely been tough for business-to-business selling and also business-to-consumer selling. And these are the other three things in my mind. There's been absolutely the rise of consensus-based decisions. Sales managers often, stick their finger in the chest of their salesperson and say, go and sell to the executive sponsor, go and get into the C-suite, go and sell to the CFO. And I think we should start high in an account and be sponsored down. We absolutely should. But the reality is the CFO or the CEO or the COO of an organisation today is still going to look to his team to make a recommendation, and it's rare for those people to roll their team. They want consensus. It's especially true in government departments. You need to get everybody on board. Now what that means is the cost of selling, the complexity of selling is increasing. The other thing is that buyers are increasingly risk averse and distrustful of the return on investment claims that are made by sellers. They really want you to prove it. And the other thing that's going on, which is tough for all industries to deal with, is this relentless commoditization of both products and services. Buying organisations, I think, are maturing and getting cleverer at a faster rate than sales organisations are. As much as we read the books on how to sell and we're looking at the research, procurement organisations are very sophisticated and they're very data-driven. So they're getting very good at buying and making us a commodity. Don't come and sell to us, fill in our spreadsheet, we'll score all of this up, we'll stay in control of this process. We're not going to make a personality-based decision. Let me just talk a little bit about the problem of commoditization to bring it into sharp relief. When I showed you that photograph and told you the story of that plane crash I had, it was at a time when I was running a manufacturing business in Australia. It was only a small manufacturing business. We only had about 20 employees. And we manufactured construction equipment, hydraulic buckets and backhoe attachments and accessories for skid steer loaders, what a lot of you would know as being a bobcat. So we were a manufacturer, and the manufacturing industry back when I was doing that had the advantage of a very low Australian dollar, so that helped us compete overseas. But I believe in the last 30 years, sadly, the most successful export of Australia has actually been our manufacturing jobs. And we're now sending information worker jobs overseas very successfully as well. I say that obviously sarcastically. It's actually a sad thing, but it's what's happened. And commoditization is the main reason. After World War II, the USA was the highest quality, highest volume, and most successful manufacturer in the world. They went and taught the Japanese about quality. They had the best steel, they made the best cars, they made the best white goods. That's all changed. This ship, if you can believe this, is bigger than a USA aircraft carrier. It only needs 13 crew. It travels fast enough to water ski behind. You can get 15,000 containers on board, and there's 5 of these ships that take just 5 days to cross the Pacific to get from China to America. And when they get there, they take hours, not days, hours to unload. 11 of these fully computerized cranes and fleets of trucks just cycling through underneath to actually unload them. Sadly for the USA, all of these ships go back to China empty. And this is an example of commoditization. This is what happens to all of us. And everybody tries to build a moat around their business to insulate themselves from these problems, from price pressures, from the commoditization problem. And for the USA years ago, they had a great moat. They had tariff protection. They had a giant ocean that was expensive and took a long time to cross. They had the advantage of perceptions of quality. I don't know about you, but I don't perceive a US manufactured motor car as being better quality than a Korean or a Japanese made motor car. I used to perceive Korean manufactured motor cars as poor quality. That's all changing in my mind now, and it is a reality that they're getting very good. I like Japanese motor cars. I think the quality is fantastic. So that perception of quality, the tyranny of distance, tariff protection, it all went away. And you think about that for us in Australia, and then combine with what's happened with the Australian dollar. we're at a huge advantage. We need to get smarter and better and more efficient, not just in general business, but in the way we sell. And that's what we're going to talk today about as well. So this cliched term of be a trusted advisor, that's really what we want our salespeople to go and do. In the book, The Challenger Sale, they really changed that term and call it be a challenger. I think you need a relationship of trust with somebody in order to go and challenge. But if you don't have any relationship, I think thinking about what's my provocative insight that challenges somebody is nevertheless a great way to go and get a meeting. So it's a valid way of looking at things either way. But one of the first laws of selling is that people buy from those that they like and trust. But we then need to quickly move on to how do we create value. So let me talk about the way salespeople operate. This is actually a shot out of my book, but this is not a market quadrant. This is really what's the value a salesperson brings. So on the left here, we've really got the perceived value by the sales organisation. So obviously it's low value if the salesperson is just being transactional. They're running a route, they knock on doors, they call on people, how are you going? If you've got any problems, I'll go back and complain for you. Any issues with product, that's relatively low value. And then at the higher end is this traditional business development manager role where they're very good competitive. They can go and slug it out with the competition. They know what the strengths and weaknesses are against the competition. They'll go and competitively win. And then down on this axis is the perceived value by the customer. Now again, if you're just being a socializer, visitor, helping them transact, that's relatively low value. People can do and want to do those things online today. But over here, obviously if you're building good relationships with people and an understanding of their organisation where you're seeing things and go and bring points of value to them, then I think that's good. And what both customers and sellers want is they want people to go and be strategic. But the problem is most people don't really know what that actually looks like. And they talk about these things in cliche terms. So this is in traditional terms the account manager, this is the business development manager. They say they're strategic, but they don't know what it looks like. One of the ways we can tell what quadrant a person is actually working in is we can listen to the conversations they're having. One of the big recommendations I'm going to make today is that sales managers need to get out of the office and get in the field and coach salespeople. Sales managers need to be coaches of salespeople. It is the single biggest thing, the single highest impact thing that a sales organisation can do is to free up sales managers to go and coach their people. And part of that is not to go and do their job for them. I see lots of that. The sales manager goes and says, get out of the way, I'll have the conversation. But actually sit there and shut up and listen and then provide a debrief and coach the person. And if you listen to the conversations, these people up here that are the tactical BDMs, you know that they're there because they're talking about products, features, functions. They're talking about or they're obsessed about the competition. These people that are really relationship people that in their worst form are just professional visitors are really just responsive. They want to go back into the sales organisation and be a customer advocate, which is great, but that doesn't deliver a lot of value really for the selling organisation. And you know that someone's strategic when they're talking about delivering outcomes and managing risks. That's what senior people care about. They care about, I want this outcome, but I want to manage the risks. How can you help me do that? That's actually what they want to focus on, and that's actually how you'll know. So all good consultants have quadrants, I know. Let me just move to one other. This really is a market quadrant now, not what's the value of the salesperson. So here is the seller's revenue or margins, and down here is the customer's complexity or the level of business value that they're going to derive. And obviously, if it's low revenue and low margin, and it's not of huge value, or it's not particularly complex for the customer, it is absolutely a commodity. We'd all agree with that. And we're all thinking today, how do I transact that commodity part of my business through channels, over the phone, on the internet, customer portals? I don't want to be throwing expensive field sales resources in that end of the market because there's not enough hours in the day for them to sell enough for that to be successful. We all get that, yeah? And then there's obviously high value solutions. And up in this part of the market, we think, well, this is where I'll pay a BDM a six-figure salary, that much again in commission, huge on target earnings, got to have a little bit of grey hair probably to have a little bit of domain expertise, and I'll go to market that way. And that's all okay. But here's what's going on. And just like if not that I'm cruel to frogs, I've never done this, but we know the science experiment story that if you put a frog in a pot on a stove and slowly bring it to the boil, the frog never notices until it's just all too late, because it happens so gradually and slowly. Just like that situation, this is what's happening to us in the market. So although up here we absolutely understand I mustn't apply expensive field resources to transactional commodities, the problem is this area is growing and creeping and getting bigger and bigger. And at some stage you turn around and go, what the hell has happened to me? Why are almost none of my salespeople making their numbers, but they're still working hard? It's because there's not enough hours in the day to transact that number of transactions. We need to figure out how to do that business well and force people to value. So marketing, phone sales, internet channels are viable ways to go do that part of the segment. And hunters are affordable, and farmers or account managers are affordable. You notice the farmers aren't in the middle of this quadrant. The revenue has got to be high enough, I think, to actually fund them. We've got to be able to fund these roles profitably. But here's the interesting thing. Given that this box is increasing, is there such thing as a high margin commodity? The thing I see in the real world with a lot of the clients that I work with is their reps are getting much bigger quotas or numbers they've got to hit for products and services that are lower and lower margin, and they're running out of hours. So we've got to be strong and do the analysis and take things away to create the focus that we want. And the same thing here, a professional visitor is a luxury that I think a lot of industries just can't continue to afford. So if we take away those transactional commodities, and which will in essence force our best salespeople, the 60% of them that are going to be around in 10 years' time, force the best of them to work out, how do I transition to value? Not as a cliche, but value as defined by the customer. Value as defined by the customer, where I can go and sell profitable products and services. Has anybody here in the room read the book, The Challenger Sale by Corporate Executive Board? So a few people. I would highly encourage you to go and get it. It is the latest thinking. It's quite provocative. The thing that the Corporate Executive Board, Matt Dixon and Brett that wrote the book actually talk about is that they analysed organisations, over 1,200 of them, and they came up with 5 personas of salespeople. And what they concluded is that the most likely persona to be successful in business to business, new business selling, is this persona here of challenger. We've all got organisations where there's the lone wolf. These are the people who make their number year after year typically. No one really knows how. They tend to leave, a whole lot of bodies and carnage behind them in the deals that they've done. But we tolerate them because they bring in the revenue. In essence, what Challenger says is the moment those people stop making their numbers, you need to get rid of them. And they say that the hard worker and the problem solver can potentially be trained to go and be challengers. I'll explain what challenger means in a moment. And that your relationship builders, again, you probably need to move on. They don't say it that brutally. You need to read between the lines, but it's this persona here. And what that persona is really all about is being a domain expert and being brave enough to go and take a provocative insight to a senior person within your prospective customer or existing customer around unique business value, something that changes the world of the client. Now, it's got to be well researched. I've seen a number of organisations here in Australia have a go at doing Challenger, interestingly, without engaging the Corporate Executive Board. They've just had a go themselves or with some other consultancy. And all they've ended up doing is 1980s telling is selling feature, function, benefit stuff from marketing, thinking it's Challenger. And that isn't. Challenger is difficult to do, requires a whole lot of insight. These are actually the results from their research. So you can see that the Challenger persona here, so this light blue colour is the percentage of core performers in a team, and the dark blue is the high performers. So if you're looking for high performers, it's people that engage with this kind of approach. They're the ones most likely to actually be successful. Now, just while we're talking about Challenger as a potential methodology, I'm going to define the difference between sales process and sales methodology today as well. But if you look at the different methodologies that have been out there, we're obviously aware of Carnegie back in the 50s, post-World War II, attention, interest, desire, and close people, made famous in the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. Feature, function, advantage, benefit. I remember working at Digital Equipment Corporation early in my sales career and sitting through literally PowerPoint decks of nearly 200 slides, about the latest PC or server that was coming to market, and marketing would try and link every feature or function to be some kind of advantage and customer benefit. It was incredibly tedious. We then had Rackham, who I think is the demigod of professional selling today. Spin selling is still highly relevant. But that was a framework for having sales conversations, not running strategy. Huthwaite morphed it into value selling. We had Eads and others come up with solution selling. All of this here really combined into a thing called insight selling. I actually worked at SAP back at 2000. Value selling was a big thing back then. Really go and help the customer build a business case around what you're going to be doing for them. And the latest iteration of all of this is Challenger. And interestingly, a methodology is not really a sales process, and using a tool does not equate to actually having a good strategy. So let me get back to the first question that I posed earlier on. Is sales management the weak link in the revenue chain? My view is absolutely, unequivocally, yes. Sales management is the weak link in the revenue chain, and I'm going to talk about why, but I don't really think it's the sales manager's fault. If you have a look at what a sales manager needs to cope with, it's staggering. And in most organisations, they've cut layers of middle management out. There's fewer people in middle management. Sales managers are typically running bigger teams, and they're having to deal with greater complexity. I know today here at SAP, there's the regular half-day cadence call that's going on. So all of the sales leaders and sales directors are on a call for the best part of half a day, reporting up their numbers. This is common in many organisations. If you look at the amount of time sales managers have to spend in managing up and in doing reporting rather than focusing on their people and the quality opportunities that those people have got, there's not a lot of time is actually spent face to face. The old time and motion studies are still valid. If you look at how much time your salespeople actually spend talking with or in front of customers, it is terrifying. It is scary. And that large organisation I talked about that did the analysis, well over $400 per visit, per call that they're doing, they drive their people to do lots of calls. I know many organisations that would do a lot fewer than that and have people that cost more money. So the call for some organisations would be well over $1,000 per visit they're having with a client, if you actually have a look at the numbers. So what are the sort of sins of selling? I'm just going to touch on these briefly and then talk about what I think we can do about it. So rather than talk about problems, what is it that we can do to improve the way that we execute as an organisation? So hiring and retaining the wrong people is without doubt, in my opinion, the number one mistake that I have made myself as an MD of a company and as a sales director of a public company and sales director of other businesses. Holding on to the wrong people consumes enormous amounts of emotional energy, enormous amounts of time. It damages you in the marketplace. If you look at the negative business case for hiring and retaining the wrong person, if you hire the wrong person in complex B2B selling, it typically takes about 9 months before you've decided that, yep, they are absolutely the wrong person. You've then got to go through a process of managing them out. If they've got a quota of, say, a couple of $1 million, they're going to at best deliver half of that number, and you're then going to lose the other half in the time it takes to onboard a new person. Recruitment consultants offer you a warranty or a guarantee on placements. I mean, that's all nice, but the cost of paying the recruitment fee is a pittance compared to the real cost to the organisation of hiring the wrong person. And then you go through all of these cycles, let alone any damage that they do to your brand in the marketplace and damaging your own personal brand inside your organisation because you're the person that hired this wrong person and you haven't moved them on quickly enough. So the thing that I believe is that we tend to focus on skills and qualifications, but they just really need to be a gate. The real reason you hire somebody is because of competence, commitment, and cultural fit. Competence, commitment, and cultural fit. We'll send this slide deck out to you as a PDF. I've got all of the links to my blog and websites that have these discussions, so don't feel you have to take notes. So I'll actually send that information out. But that's a link to the blog that I've got, the thing I call the Rule of 24. If 2 of these 4 things have a negative answer, the person needs to move on. So obviously once you've hired somebody, you add performance into the equation, how they're actually performing. And if you get 2 negative answers, they just need to go. It's incredibly liberating to remove someone from your team that's actually taking a huge amount of your time and holding you back. When you think about how do I know who the right person is, I've given you that rule of 24 as a little equation to work with. But the other thing is you need people that can execute strategically. When I help do interviews with salespeople and I'll ask them the question, do you regard yourself more as tactical or transactional, or you're a strong relationship seller? Do you think you're strategic? So in my mind, I'm going around that quadrant that I showed you before. And people will inevitably say, well, I'm a bit of all of that. I say, well, you don't get off that easy. Are you strategic, really? And everybody says yes. And then I ask, so tell me what you did last week. If I followed you around for the entire week, what is it I would have seen you doing where I would go, wow, this person executes strategically. I can see what they're doing is strategic. So what are the things you do that make you strategic? What kind of answer do you think I get to that question? I get a deer in the headlights. People don't really know what being strategic looks like. They just don't. And yet, that's what we need from people. So, the thing that all people get is the first law of selling. People buy from those they like and trust. I'm a really nice person. I build rapport with people. People like from me. It's all good. That's 90% of what it takes to be successful in sales. Not today. One of the problems in selling is that we get delegated down to people we sell like. So it's one thing for the boss to say, go and engage at the C level, go and have a business conversation. But if the person's not capable of holding that conversation, they'll just get delegated down. Not sponsored down, but delegated down. You're talking about product, you can go talk to my person that deals with features and functions of products. You're talking about tech, I'll delegate you to my IT guy. Right? So we just get delegated away. So that's actually a problem. And what most salespeople are wired to talk about is they're wired to talk about what they do, how they do it, when they can do it, who's involved, where all their offices are located. Most of this information is of no interest to the person they're talking to, by the way. And the thing they're poor at doing is talking about this. Why? Why? Why should the person do anything about the problem that they've got? Why should they work with our organisation to solve that problem? That's the subtext. You don't lead with that question. But they need to get really good at talking about why. I showed you this quadrant before, and what I think it means to be in this top right corner is those things there, to research and prepare, to engage early at senior levels, to really set the agenda, to create a bias, to embed ourselves in a business case, and to get the people we're talking to focused on how we can deliver that outcome at the lowest risk for them. And if you have that kind of conversation and you get buy-in, they'll then work with you and sponsor you down into the organisation. Another way of looking at this same thing, we've all seen slides like this before. This is, if you want to call it, the buyer's journey, where customers go through this process here. And obviously at a high level, that's sort of from a discovery to making a decision process. And for selling organisations, we tend to think about those organisations in those terms there. We tend to think that they're ignorant about what we could do for them. Hey, now I've had a meeting with them, I've sent them some information, they're curious about it. Now they're researching and we're helping set the agenda. They're committed now to buy. They've got a project on the table. But again, if you said, well, what does being strategic look like? Here's a couple of problems I see really commonly, and from a sales management point of view in coaching people, this is what I'd recommend you do. The first thing is, if we're engaging down here, we all know the tender hell problem, don't we? We've all experienced this. It's all rush, we don't have time, it's all price focused. It's tough because we turned up to the dance late. And in this scenario, what we're typically dealing with is we're dealing with people in procurement and a project manager, and they tend to block us. So the problem of engaging in the middle tier of an organisation and thinking I'll work my way up is people constantly want to block us and stop us from having those meetings. They don't want us to go around them. And as much as consensus-based decision making is real, we still need to sell to the people that can say no, as well as the people that say yes. We need to cover all of those people. So being strategic from that last slide is those things, but again, the common problem I see is people will do these activities, they'll do these activities here that we talked about, but then they'll go and have the conversation over here. They'll go and have the right conversation with the wrong person. as a coach of salespeople, we need to help them and equip them to have the right conversation with the right person. Now that doesn't mean that we need to get to the CEO in every deal that we're selling or for every type of product that we sell. There are middle tier people that make the decision, and if they make that recommendation, it is what's going to happen. And if that's validated and true, great, then let's sell at that level, but we need people to think, what's the highest practical place in an organisation that I could be selling to? Let me get on to the second thing. So the second big mistake, so first mistake is hiring and retaining the wrong people. The second biggest mistake I see is people pursuing deals that cannot be won. They pursue business that cannot be won. Salespeople are fundamentally wired to be optimistic. And we don't want to be pessimistic, but we also don't want the motivation of an organisation damaged, and we don't want resources drained away from where they could be applied to where we can win business either. So what we need is a really good qualification process. In the book, The Challenger Sale, one of the case studies they do is for Grainger, which is a hardware company, kind of like Bunnings in the USA. They implemented this whole model of how do we at Grainger go and take a provocative, game-changing insight to our customers to get them to do more business with us. Now, if you think, well, that all works if you're in a complex solution selling world, these guys are really commodities. They still managed to figure it out. And I won't tell you what that was. I'd encourage you to read the book. It's very interesting. But one of the senior managers at Grainger is a lady called Deb Oller. And she had a saying or a question. Why should the customer buy from you over your competition? Why should the customer buy from you over the competition when they're looking competitively? And in essence, it's these two things here. I regard the biggest competitor that we have to deal with when I'm working with my clients, I say to them, the biggest competitor you've got is do nothing. It's the status quo. Just because someone's researching and having meetings and exploring things doesn't mean they're committed to buying. And it's easy to think you're selling strategically and actually scare the customer away, to paralyze them, think, well, gee, we need to research this more. Maybe this is harder than what we thought. So why will they buy anything at all? Why will they buy specifically from us? And then what you need to do is you need to pick a qualification methodology that works for you. There are lots. All of these are good. All of these are good. But the thing I find is organisations say, well, we have a qualification methodology or a qualification tool, but it's not embedded inside their CRM product, their customer relationship management software. It's some separate thing. It's a sheet of paper, it's a spreadsheet that's not integrated with the way they sell, and it's not used in a disciplined way. So they're not really qualifying properly at all. So very important to understand what defines a qualified prospect for us in our world. Third thing, failing to have close plans in place. So if you look at the entire sales process, to me it all begins with qualifying a prospect well, qualifying the people you want to go after and target and engage early with. So have a criteria, and then if someone comes to you, have another qualification criteria that makes sure that you can win this deal before you get engaged with that person, because it's expensive, and it's very expensive to come second. The other end of the spectrum is closing the deal. And the truth in selling is that opening is far more important than closing. If we open well, closing will happen naturally. But salespeople's forecast dates, I think, are wildly inaccurate most of the time, and it's one of the biggest stress points for sales management, and it's one of the biggest frustration areas for CEOs and boards. They want revenue predictability. And the way that you deliver that revenue predictability and the way you remove the stress is you make sure that people have win plans, close plans, whatever you want to call them. And I'll work with my clients on these, and what I do is say, let's build the close plan, and let's not have the last date on the close plan, the date they signed the contract, because we care about that, they don't. Let's go past that to the date that they're live, realising the benefits of the thing that we're going to implement for them. And you know what? Let's even go beyond that. Let's pretend that 90 days later we could get a case study, because we all want case studies. Let's go case study date is the last thing. Then go back to go live date. Let's keep working back. And yes, back in here somewhere, about 2/3 the way back, there'll be a date where they've got to sign a contract. So let's go and work out what we think that is. Does it need to go to the board? How do you get on board papers? How often does the board meet? Are there other committees? How does this whole process work? Who can say yes? Who can say no? Let's understand all this and map it out. Then what we do is we change the name of that document. We call it a project alignment plan. and I say print this out and go and sit down with your coach, or even better, your executive sponsor in here, and say to them, I'm working inside our organisation to make sure that we have the right resources for your project when you want to go ahead. So I'm seeking to manage expectations inside our organisation. Can I just validate with you that these activities and timeframes are exactly in sync with what your team is thinking? Now, I don't think that comes across as some cute sales gimmick. I think the seller would look at that and go, wow, this is rare. I'm dealing with a pro. I'm dealing with a professional salesperson who's treating this like a project. They're acting like a project manager. They're identifying the risks for me, the interdependencies within the timeline, because we've all had that problem, haven't we, where the customer keeps slipping their process, but your date to deliver doesn't change, which is actually very unfair. If you do this process well, you also help solve that problem. So that's actually the third thing. So build your team around these things of the 3 C's, competence, commitment, and cultural fit. Define what being strategic really means. Define what value really means. Not value as in the number of features and functions we offer in a product, but value in terms of how does the customer define value, what does their business case look like, and drive good deal qualification. Third thing is ensure you've got these close plans or win plans in place, but make sure they're customer centric rather than the salesperson's assumptions. And then 2 other things. The other thing I would suggest when you go back into organisations is to think about is consider making structural changes. Rather than the poor frog that didn't know till it was too late, have a hard critical look about the products, services, margins, markets you're servicing, your options for channels. What really belongs in the hands of expensive field business to business salespeople versus what can you transact over the web, over the phone, through channels? And consider being brave enough to take those low value commodity transactional things away from salespeople to force them to move to value. I don't know whether any of you have done this, but you know the best way to get a decent set of new clothes is to throw out all of the stuff that's cluttering up your wardrobe. Because you think about, I need to buy some more things, and you do. You never do it while ever the wardrobe's full. And it's the same with salespeople. While ever they're busy not being successful, they're not going to get busy being strategic. So part of sales management is to provide the framework and guidance. And then this big important thing of get into the field and coach the team, define being strategic and value, and really drive process. Here's what I want to finish on, which is the 6th and final point for today. I'm going to talk about what I regard as the holy grail of sales enablement. It's where strategy and execution actually comes together. One of the common things I see is what I see is people doing the execution of strategy poorly. A lot of people are like the guys on this golf hole. They'll stand there and they're thinking about, well, we've got the water here and we've got a creek up here. I've got trees on the left. Am I gonna take a 5-wood and lay up onto here? Am I going to take my driver? Am I going to try and draw it around the corner? That's a higher risk shot. I normally hit a fade. So they're pontificating about their strategy. But the problem is they can't hit the damn ball, right? So you've got to be able to hit the ball. Hitting the ball is actually more important than strategy. You can get great results if you just do the fundamentals well. And if you can get strategy and the fundamentals together, then you can be hugely successful. Many organisations come up with strategies that their salespeople can't implement. That's one of the dangers of this challenger model. You can read the book and go, this is great. I'm going to, get my salespeople out there confronting customers, delivering provocative insights and challenging them. And the problem is, if it's just feature, function, benefit, 1980s marketing on steroids stuff that they're doing, it's not going to be successful. So I think the holy grail is if you can get methodology and process to come together inside the technology you use to enable the way you sell, and use that as a coaching platform, that's how you drive change. Someone reading a book, attending a course, filling in a tool doesn't mean they're going to execute strategically. There's a fair bit of confusion in the marketplace about, well, what's the difference between methodology and process? For me, methodology is how you sell, and sales process is what you do when you sell. And I'll just explain that. So how you formulate your strategy to create those tactics that help you win. So how do you identify risks? How do you cover the bases? So you use one of those strategic selling methodologies. I've come up with one myself, RSVP selling. So do we have relationships at the right level? Have we got a strategy for defeating the competition? The V is value. Are we creating unique value for the customer? Do we know their buying process? Now, that's not a sales process, it's really a sales methodology. It's a way of thinking about how am I going to go and sell here? And then what process is do you have a tool and a process for qualifying, for doing discovery, for doing proposals, for demonstrating and controlling the risks in demonstrations, for closing the contract, for onboarding the customer? This is really the sales process. Right? It's a process that you can map, it's a process you can get people to follow, and there's tools that you use to do it. And then what you want with a CRM product is you want that to be the coaching platform where you're managing all of those elements. The thing that I see with CRM systems of all brands out there in the marketplace is most CRM systems are poorly implemented contact databases with deals in pipelines providing inaccurate forecasts, and with the salespeople seeing it as an imposition and management seeing it as an expense that they're not getting the return on. And universally the thing that frustrates management is they're not getting that revenue predictability, they're not getting accuracy. But it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. If you bring your methodology and process into a CRM, and that's one of the things I've always admired about SAP as an organisation. The value to me in my mind of SAP is integration. I know there's lots of other values of SAP, but that integrated view of what's going on in an organisation, this is really the same thing. Bring your methodology and your process inside a CRM product so it's transparent. So if the salesperson says, I want resources to go and pursue this opportunity, and they're expensive resources to pursue complex deals. I want the resources. Transparently, people can look inside the CRM and see, well, how did this opportunity score up in our qualification process? Do we know who all of the key players are in the account? Is there a map here of the players inside the account? If the salesperson is forecasting the deal in the CRM, I want to click a button and see, what does the close plan look like? What are the activities in a close plan validated by the customer that support this date that the salesperson is saying we're going to be able to book the revenue? I want to transparently see it. Not, I need to phone up the salesperson and he turns up with a folder and 37 different sheets of paper telling a story about why the deal's going to close. We can see it. There's a close plan in place. And that to me really is the holy grail of selling. CRM must be a strategy and a process rather than a technology and a reporting tool. It's largely just seen as a piece of technology we're going to put in, we'll make the salespeople use it. And here's the problem with that approach. Despite what a salesperson signs in their employment contract, which says the opposite to what I'm about to say, despite what they've signed, the way they feel is that their contacts and their pipeline are theirs. They don't belong to the employer at all. They're theirs. And if they left, those customers would all want to follow them. We need to make CRM a thing that's of value to the salesperson, so that they want to use it, so that both parties are being served, both employer and employee. If there's a reason for the salesperson to use the CRM, because it helps them with a great methodology that drives a process that makes it efficient, and it means that management can transparently see the revenue predictability of the business, that's when you solve the problem. So just to conclude, really think about how can you bring process, methodology, technology together. Those other 5 things I talked about don't require any technology to go and do. That's why they're actually great things to think about, because you don't need to get any budget to go and do them. It's a case of freeing up your time and being brave enough to actually execute it. So that's the presentation. I really appreciate you taking time to have a listen, and we're happy to throw it open to questions. Thank you.